Earlier today, I really thought about doing a new one since I have those two shorter ones up that I put up after my Friday show. I thought about doing a new one today, maybe just kind of combining aspects of the last few into one and adding some other developments in with that, along with combining all of that with things I've covered before as well, sort of like piecing everything together into one concise presentation. I mean, I guess you could call it that, but it has mostly to relate to the two biggest threats we face militarily and why they're the two biggest threats we face. And, this comes in the face of us declining, just the whole West in general declining. And I think there's a lack of ability on the part of not just the peoples of the collective West, but on the parts of the actual regimes of the Western nations to accept this. And it shows all the time in all of the biased media, propaganda reports that we see on a daily basis, day to day. I mean, it's like seemingly like never ending. It's gone on for a long time, trying to prop us up in such a way to where it makes us look a lot stronger than what we truly actually are, while denigrating the very real danger and capabilities and threats that our enemies in the East actually really truly pose to us and our collective survival. And I'm going to discuss a whole bunch of different facts and figures and factoids and instances, and I'm going to string them all together into one video. So, as I get into this, what I planned on discussing was a little bit here about Russia and the situation there, but also a little bit there about China and their situation, because the two are the closest possible allies that you would ever see. And the reasons for this aren't just historical, but they're also very much due to the way the alliance is forming to accept other nations into it, because you have to understand that in the Eurasian bloc, the whole Eurasian bloc wasn't always so unified, because you had, examples, and I've said stuff like this before. You've had India being more of a traditional ally of Russia or the Soviet Union in times past as well. And you've had Pakistan being more closely aligned with China. But now that, like, basically all of Eurasia is coming together, there's an integration process going on where everybody's trying to put aside their differences, because we're at like a major inflection point, a turning point. Just change in general is going on in the world. Nothing ever stays the same. Not empires, not alliances, not anything. Nothing ever stays the same. Things are constantly in flux, things constantly change. And in that light, that is why you see all these different diplomatic dances that are going on all around you. I mean, you see it happening between nation states, and you see changes resulting from it. New power blocks are solidifying, and old ones are losing prominence and melting away. And I'm going to discuss all of these things. But when it comes to China, I'm going to discuss their numbers as it relates to their military production, economic and financial information. I'm going to include that in this, along with drawing comparisons between China and the West. But not only that, but I'm going to draw comparisons between how China used to be and how it is now. And I'm also going to talk about basically the key vital areas of technology they're leading in and why it matters in terms of warfare. And I'm also going to discuss the applications, because how you apply technologies is very important in that scope and of warfare and waging wars. And I'm going to relate the technology and the numbers, like I just mentioned before that, within the scope of and scale of military doctrine, and why that matters in the guise of the new fourth generation warfare doctrines that they actually employ. And I'm also going to discuss why China is the biggest threat and how they've surpassed us. And I'm going to basically explain how all of these things pieced together comprise a much bigger picture, because that's what research and analytics essentially is. It's you find the information and then you piece it all together to form a much larger, more coherent picture of how things are. But before I even talk about China, I'm going to talk about the situation in Europe and how things relate insofar as that's concerned. There's, and I've said this for a long time. I think there's a lot of things in the media that are drastically overhyped. Now, yes, sure. I've heard this earlier on a video earlier I was watching. One of the reasons, and this makes perfect sense to me, and I'm sure a lot of other people, one of the reasons why you see the whole nuke being used in Ukraine thing overly hyped in such a way is because the West has to save face, because they have told a whole bunch of lies that Russia's losing, and they've tried to say that they were running out of things when in fact they really weren't running out of anything. But they had to. This has been going on for many, 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 many months now. Basically the entire conflict has been just one large show of media trying to say that Russia's losing and they're running out of everything. So they have to say that they're going to use nukes because they're losing. If they they can't withdraw that now. They can't withdraw it now. So yeah, it does become pretty dangerous in the sense that the West is actually projecting onto Russia the types of things that they themselves would do. Because they're all about presentation. They're all about theatrics. They're all about, putting on a show, putting on a front, even if that's, through media or entertainment or whatever else. It's all about a narrative and crafting a narrative. And part of that narrative of saying Russia's losing is because they happen to have nukes, that they would have to thus rely on their nukes, which is totally unreasonable. I mean, if you just listen to reason, and listen to what they've actually even said and looked at their actual nuclear policy, they do not have a first strike policy. They would only ever use those weapons if they felt that the survival of their nation was in jeopardy. And okay, because Ukraine is right next door, they consider that an existential threat to their nation's existence, but that's because that they feel that the West would, if they inducted Ukraine into NATO, that they would use Ukrainian soil to base their nukes. So they haven't said at any point in time, though, they never once actually said that they would conduct a first strike. They never said that. Never. But when the West projects onto Russia what they themselves would actually do, and they are losing this thing. They are losing. Ukraine's not going to win. And the West, in order to probably save face, they might just, maybe pull a nuclear FF event somewhere. I'm not saying that they would or they wouldn't, but my friend Ken, last night on his video, he said that, although it's a narrative, the predictive programming sure is there, and they're projecting onto Russia the types of, and it's reckless of them to do that. It's very reckless of them to do that, because if they are so stupid and reckless as to try something like that, which I really, really believe that that's not going to happen. I mean, I don't think, yeah, they are arrogant, they are stupid, but they're not so reckless so as to throw away everything over some stupid proxy war somewhere, over some proxy. I just don't see them doing that. That's even like a bridge too far for them. And they are really stupid and arrogant, but that's even a bridge too far for these elites. I don't see them doing it, because if you believe in the Bible and you understand where things go in the Word, and we aren't there yet. We're really not there yet. It's not time for the fall of Babylon just yet. We haven't even had an economic and financial collapse totally. Like, we haven't totally gone under yet, and we haven't had an internal conflict yet, because yes, that sure is in Jeremiah. That happens before the actual armies invade from all directions, like it describes multiple times in that book. That actually happens first. But we aren't there yet. That hasn't happened yet. So, I tend to fully believe, and I have shown ample evidence for why I believe this all throughout my channel. I don't believe that there's going to be anything like that yet. Not yet. Not yet. But yes, nukes are real. They're very real. But I don't see them doing that yet. Because Russia has no intent to use a nuke right next door to their own country, for one thing, which would be really, really stupid. It just doesn't even make sense. They're building up these humongous conventional forces. They're not even losing. They're not losing. They haven't been losing. They haven't even really tried. If you really want to get technical, they haven't even tried yet. They haven't even begun to try yet. They did a limited incursion, what they, call their quote unquote, special military operation, but that's a limited incursion. They had limited aims, limited objectives, and they used a very small amount of troops. It's been nothing but this humongous distraction away from all the issues and problems we have here in our own country, and just the collective Western world as a whole has all these problems, and they're diverting attention away from the problems here and casting it onto this proxy conflict, this proxy war being waged overseas. It's also a distraction for the money, the resources, like the ammunition, all the stuff, all the equipment that's been sent there, the munitions that can't be replaced, even the personnel in the form of volunteers, people that actually had some level of combat experience that could have been helpful if there was a way to ever turn things around back here at home, like rebuild our shattered and depleted woke military. If there was ever a way to fix that, people that have been sent over there who are fighting and dying or being maimed or being captured, those would have been the types of people that could have helped rebuild it. People like me, but I will never go and volunteer to fight in a proxy war, because that's just stupid. People like me are far more valuable here at home instead of going over to a place like that. I would never do something like that. I don't understand why people are fighting for this corrupt rogue system going over to some proxy conflict, because what they're doing is they're just a pawn of the globalists, these Western elites, and the same would go for like the Russian side. Anybody that would volunteer to fight for the Russian side, you would just be a pawn for their elites, for their Eastern elites. People should stay out of these worldly systems as much as they can. People should have a position of a self-defense, self-determination sort of position wherein you're not actually taking anybody's sides, where you're completely neutral, where you stay out of all these things that are going on in the world, where you maintain a defensive posture only, where you don't get involved in the machinations of some uber rich asshole elites anywhere, whether it's Eastern or Western elites. You don't want to be involved in their proxy conflicts. So that's neither here nor there, but I was saying that these things are dragging us under, and they're a massive distraction. In multiple ways, they're a distraction. So we're getting deeper and deeper involved in this thing, and this nuke propaganda, and that's exactly what it is. It's part of the narrative of trying to make people think that Russia's losing and they're desperate, and they're really not. They're really not. Like I said, I've heard it said, other people have said this, they're really not desperate. They're not. They have to perpetuate this nuke thing, and it is incredibly reckless, like I've heard others say, because the Russians have never said they would do that. And it's gotten even to the point where Putin, when he went to Astana over there in Kazakhstan, the capital of Kazakhstan, he was in Astana, and he said that when the Russians initially went in for their limited incursion, he said it was not his intent to actually destroy Ukraine. His intent was to bring them to the negotiating table by grinding down their military, denazifying it, and basically just, shielding the people of Donbass. He wanted them to come to the negotiating table so that they would agree to initially giving LPR and DPR more autonomy than they intended to. I'm talking about Ukraine give them more autonomy than Ukraine intended to, and also for them to recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea, which has been running now for 8 years. So that was his original intent, but that was his original intent, which means that the intent now is, he said, the exact words were, I didn't originally intend on destroying Ukraine. That was what he said. So the silence after that is deafening, because it doesn't leave much to the imagination at all. Because if he said his original intent wasn't to destroy Ukraine at first, then that means that now, with the pattern of behavior we see, with the buildup of 300,000 Russian forces between Belgorod and also next door in Belarus, near the southern borders with Ukraine, on Ukraine's northern borders, when we see these buildups going on, and we see Russian allies, which are basically other CSTO nation states, as well as Serbia, as well as China in particular, China, all telling their citizens to get out, then we know what's coming. We know that there's going to be a full-scale invasion. We know that's going to be exactly what's coming. Now, if I had to make a prediction, just for fun, if not literally fun, but you know what I mean, just for shits and giggles, if I had to make a prediction about when we would actually see the conflict expand from this limited incursion into something larger, I would say that I would estimate that being anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks tops. And that has a lot to do with weather conditions there more than it does much else, because we know that we're in the rainy season right now, but what they're waiting for is the typical Rasputitsa rains that they have that turns things to mud, for their heavier vehicles. They're waiting for a hard freeze to set in to where their heavier vehicles likely aren't going to have very many problems with the mud. And usually that type of thing begins sometime in November. So here we are, halfway into October. Well, a little over halfway. We're about halfway or so into October, and of course, the time it takes them to accumulate logistics, because to be able to launch a full-scale invasion, even if it's of your neighbor, you still have to build up logistics for it. You have to move supplies and ammunition and vehicle parts and everything you need to forward logistical depots. Sort of like in my hypotheticals, how I talk about the CCP properties that are used as logistical centers for the invasion. Well, it's the same concept, but here it would be in, southern Belarus and also in Russia. So they would be moving these things, these supplies, forward with all their forward troops. And, it takes a little bit of time. Even if you're going to invade your neighbor, it still takes a little bit of time to move by railroad and by truck all your forces into position. Now we know, being this humongous oil-producing giant that Russia is, they're not going to have any issues with their military's fuel. So for them to move enormous logistical capabilities is not hard for them to do whatsoever at all. Nor is it, regardless of whether it's rail or by road on flatbed trucks, it's not going to be hard for them to move everything they need to into position. So that's what they're going to be doing from now until whenever they decide to kick this thing off. Like I said, it could be anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. It might be in 2 weeks, might even be in 4 weeks, like a whole month from now, a whole 32 days, however many days. They're going to likely wait for the most optimal conditions for moving heavy vehicles through the terrain there, because you don't want a whole bunch of your stuff getting stuck in the mud. The Germans had a real big problem with that when they invaded the USSR back in 1941, because when summer became fall, it got really rainy and they had entire columns getting stuck in mud, and they were hell to pull out of that mud, because there weren't very many paved roads in the old Soviet Union back in the 40s. And there really weren't even into the 50s for that matter. But during World War II, there was a really, really stark lack of any sort of paved roads throughout the Soviet Union. So that also is a factor. And Ukraine, being one of the poorest nations in Europe, and it really shouldn't be, for all intents and purposes, Ukraine should be a prosperous nation due to the access it has to the coast, or by the time this is over with, I should say had, past tense. It has access to water. It has the ability to grow crops, has very good soil quality, and it also has a lot of precious mineral wealth within its borders. So, for all intents and purposes, it should have been a prosperous nation, but instead, it was one of the most corrupt and poorest nations in Europe. And a lot of that had to do with the regime being so corrupt and just corruption being so deeply rooted in the culture there itself. And that really came about during the collapse of the USSR. You saw these oligarchs take off all over the former USSR successor states, whereas like some nation states like Russia got it a lot better under control than the others. You saw Ukraine just sort of stay corrupt. They never really cleaned it up. And oligarchy is basically when you bridge political and economic power where you're able to bridge both of those concepts into one. That makes you an oligarch. And oligarchs definitely have a hold on that place, and they've kept it basically woefully corrupt, which is why the West has been able to get in there and turn it into a proxy nation. But again, that what's going on now is that Russia has a more than capable offensive general. I can't even pronounce the last name. I would probably butcher it. It starts with an S. But I can't say it. I would butcher it. But they appointed this general to command the forces that are building up in both Russia, in the Belgorod region, but also in Belarus, along the southern border region of Belarus, because you have these allies of Russia telling their citizens and diplomatic staff to clear out of the way, which, again, it's a very, very clear indication, very clear of what's coming. It clearly indicates that there's going to be a massive expansion of the conflict into a full-scale invasion from a limited incursion. And Russia was never losing. So again, the whole notion, the whole concept of them using a nuke right next door, it's absurd. It's absurd. The only one that would do that would be us. And we, in order to blame it on them. But I don't even think, even as ignorant and as arrogant, as stupid as these Western elites can be, I don't even think that they're that. I don't think it goes beyond that. I don't think they're suicidal. I think that they're just really stupid and arrogant. I don't think that they would risk losing everything that they currently rule over just so that they could support a proxy. I just don't see them throwing everything away for that, because that's exactly what that would do. Then Russia would retaliate with nukes, but I don't see them doing something so just inconceivable. It's truly inconceivable. I think that this is going to be, so I've made my own personal predictions surrounding this thing. Just my own personal predictions for me, myself, and I. Now, this is what I see. I basically see this. I see Russia finishing what they started here. I see them rebuilding the old, they're going to resurrect the old Russian Empire, or maybe or Russian Empire or Soviet Union. Both of it historically sat on the same land. It was Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. It was Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, plus all the four former Central Soviet republics, the Central Asian Soviet republics like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. I'm sorry, five. But that was also the same lands that were the Russian Empire. The Russian Empire basically sat on exactly the same territory that the Soviet Union did as well. So I see Russia basically resurrecting the old Russian Empire by means of finishing what they started in Ukraine. I see them pulling Ukraine back into the fold. And remember, keep this in mind. I don't know if everybody remembers this or not, but last year, there were briefly very serious discussions going on between Belarus and the Russian Federation about bringing Belarus and Russia together into the Russian Federation by inducting Belarus into it. I don't know if people remember that or not, but that was something that was seriously discussed, and that was after they had tried to assassinate Lukashenko. So that was going on around that time, and that just shows that there is definitely something going on behind closed doors that points to that very thing coming to pass. I mean, we know already. We already know. I mean, if you understand the Bible, you already know that Russia and China are key major players in the end times. So they're both going to enlarge themselves drastically. They're both going to enlarge themselves. So I totally see, after Russia winning this thing, I see NATO totally basically disintegrating and falling apart. I think this is going to be like basically the death knell to NATO. I don't see anybody being so reckless and stupid so as to actually ignite some kind of a nuclear conflict. I think that this is going to end swiftly in a very quick way when it actually starts. And I'm talking about the full-scale invasion, going from the limited incursion that it is right now, just in the east predominantly. I see it when it expands to a full-scale invasion. I see it being brought to an end really quick. And that's because after months of grinding down the Ukrainian armed forces to the point to where they've had to do some roughly 8 rounds of mobilizations of their population, I see them being so weakened, so thinned out, and plus there's another confluence of things besides just the fact that Ukraine's on its 8th mobilization. Another thing comes into play here too, and that's the fact that the West is running very, very low on things that they can send as military aid in the form of armaments packages. I mean, they're running very low on things to send Ukraine, just across the whole collective West together as a whole. So what that means is that Ukraine's resources in this thing are very finite. They're very limited. And they've already lost heavily in this conflict. I mean, there's no denying that. There's no way to deny that they've lost heavily in this. And the Russians being outnumbered, how they've been outnumbered, and I'm talking about just with this limited incursion, just with this little expeditionary force they sent in, this expeditionary force that's been outnumbered 10 to 1 just within Ukraine's borders. They've ground this much larger Ukrainian force down to the nub. It's been ground down to the nub, and I've said this for a long time. So this isn't nothing new. So they've been ground down to the nub, and what's going to happen is when these forces from the northern parts of Ukraine and even other parts of their country have been pulled out of those areas to be sent east to the fighting in the east, which you could tell Kiev is very keen on because they're so laser focused on that area, they're not paying attention to their other sectors. Now, another thing that comes into play here is the fact that the Starlink the Starlink satellites that have been trying to feed the regime in Kiev, live battlefield intel, well, they've been compromised. They've either been hacked and shut down through hacking, because that's certainly one way it could be done, or it's not being reported, or potentially Russia sent up some S-500s and knocked them out of the air, knocked them out of the sky. That's a very real possibility. I don't know if people have ever heard the saying before or not, but it's been said that the next major war will begin in space. Now, you know I don't believe in outer space. You know that. I mean, satellites that we call satellites are basically imaging devices or other technology that's held up by high altitude balloons, like very high altitude balloons. Like they're held up basically as high as the firmament, or just below it rather. But, you know, that notwithstanding, the Russians either knocked these things out of the air, or they hacked them and made them basically useless. And the reason why I say that is because not only has there been murmurings about that actually having had happened, but the Chinese, not that long ago, their defense ministry said that if in any way, shape, or form, they straight up told Elon Musk, if in any way, shape, or form, if your Starlink interferes with our national security, we will knock your satellites out of the sky. That's what they said. The Chinese said that. And they didn't, it wasn't even that long ago. Now, this was months ago where the Chinese said that to Elon Musk. They sure did. But so that's why I believe that it is entirely possible, because Russia also has anti-satellite weapons in the form of the S-500. And I'm sure they have other ones too. But that it's not completely outside the realm of possibility for the Russians to have swatted some of these down and either basically scared Starlink away from the area and told them behind closed doors that any further interference will result in more swattings, I'll just say, or they hacked them and compromised them in that sort of a way. I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities here, because they've a lot of people have been warned to stop getting involved in the conflict who ought not be involved, and to stop providing help. There's been repeated warnings to the West about giving aid to the Ukrainians and getting involved where they shouldn't be involved because it's not their fight, and it really isn't. We have no business being over there. Nobody in America, with all the problems we have here, should be supporting a globalist war overseas. We've basically, we've seen how those things go. I mean, if we didn't learn enough from Iraq and Afghan, we left Afghan with our tail tucked between our legs. I mean, if that wasn't enough, for us to even consider getting involved in something else right after that basically just happened, I mean, when is enough enough? That doesn't mean that that doesn't mean I'm not, this or I'm that or this or not that. Look, I'm just a man who holds no allegiance to any system, any regime. I don't care about these elites who run these regimes. I don't care about them. They're the ones that create all these problems that we have. Why would I support any initiatives that they want to get us involved in as a collective, as a society, as a nation, as a land, as a people? Why would I support anything that they want? Of course I'm not going to support anything they want. I mean, yeah, okay, I'm interested in the Ukraine thing to the extent that it, I have a military mind. I always have found stuff like that very interesting. I'm talking about warfare and, battlefield tactics and strategies and doctrines and armies and how armies work. But anything beyond that, I don't care about. I don't support any of the causes. I could care less. I really could. I could care less. And I don't think anybody should be supporting any of this, because these wars that are fought between Eastern and Western globalists all they do is screw the people. they always, in the end, screw the ordinary man, the ordinary woman, the ordinary person. That's all they do. So why would anybody support something like that? I don't support it. So I think that what we're going to see, getting back to my original point, is that very soon this conflict is going to expand from a limited incursion that had a small, limited number of troops involved, going after limited aims, objectives, we're going to see that expand into a full-scale invasion that is going to basically bring Ukraine, as we have known it, as its own sovereign nation. It's basically going to bring it to an end. And if they don't put a puppet regime in there, then they'll just bring it back into Russia. I could totally see that happening. So that goes back to what I said about my prediction, about them, once they bring it to an end, bringing it back into the fold with Russia. They'll be doing this with other places too. I see it plain as day. And the same thing goes with China over there in Asia. But the way I see things over in Asia are a little bit different. Now, I see China, once we've had our big collapse, what's going to happen after we've had our really big collapse is that traditional allies of ours over there in Asia, they're not going to be able to have any sort of, really anything from us, like no effective forms of trade, no assistance in any type of security, no nothing. So who are they going to turn to? Well, once we've collapsed and we're out of the picture, they're going to turn to China. And I'm talking about traditional American allies are going to turn to China because they're not going to have any other choice. They're already in some dire straits because with the regime here shutting down our oil and gas and just natural resources in general in pursuit of this green BS garbage program, all these different programs in general. I mean, shutting all those things down means that Japan, who is traditionally resource strapped, being an island with very little natural resources, especially in the domain of fuel, and same with South Korea, really. I mean, South Korea on the Korean Peninsula does not have very many, not very many resources at all either, and it doesn't really have any real access to be able to extract anywhere else either. So what are they going to do? They're going to have to turn to China because if they continue to be on bad terms with China, now South Korea and China have tried to improve relations, in the past couple decades, but if Japan in particular, and I see them turning to China eventually because they'll be forced to have to reconcile with China. But South Korea and China, they're not going to be able to get fuel from us, and they're already having a hell of a time getting fuel from us already. And China can literally cut them off from the Middle East, from the fuel that comes from the Middle East. They can cut them off at any moment with their humongous navy. Now, never forget, China has the biggest navy, the biggest and most technologically advanced navy in the world now. They went from a brown water navy back in the 90s to a green water navy, and now they have a full-fledged blue water navy with the largest amount of vessels on Earth, and it's the most technologically advanced to boot. They're everything they have, from radars to electronic warfare to just the weapon systems on board their ships and how they're all integrated. I mean, they're and the vessels themselves, the way they're built, it's all very, very impressive for them to go from a brown water to a blue water navy. And not only a blue water navy, but the biggest navy in the world in a span of 30 years. Just 30 years is all it took. It's very impressive. They have 355 frontline ships, and they have 200 additional auxiliary ships. 555 total vessels. And that's not even their Marine militia, which is a paramilitary formation, which is basically like combining the Coast Guard and the Marine Corps Reserve into like one thing if you had to compare it to something. They have their own ships. But I'm just talking about just the PLAN, the Chinese Navy. 355 frontline ships, frontline vessels. 200 auxiliary ships, 555 total ships. It's enormous. It's enormous. 30 years. Now they have that. And they crank out ships like you can't even believe. Everything from submarines to now aircraft carriers. Do people even understand how long it just on average it can take to build an aircraft carrier, and in the span of just several years, they basically now have 4 aircraft carriers from their first one. Now they're up to 4, plus all the helicopter carriers that are basically some people call them like those what do they call those assault ships or landing ships or helicopter carriers. They have different, you can call it by several different names, but they have those, which if you have a jump jet like something equivalent to like what the Harrier 2 or the F-35, which is garbage, but if you had something like a jump jet, you can turn those carrier assault ships, those helicopter carrying ships, you could turn those into aircraft carriers basically, because they would serve the same purpose, because you could still carry jets on the deck. But full-fledged aircraft carriers, China has 4. Their 4th one is having its electronics and radar suites and things like that installed into it right now. So it's basically about done. It's been the hull is already fully complete. They're just installing all the, final pieces onto it, for lack of a better thing to say. I mean, it's basically they're putting the finishing touches on it. So, China, biggest land-based missile forces. I made a whole video, dedicated to that. Biggest land-based missile forces on Earth. And that also bleeds over into their Navy, because their Navy's the biggest Navy in the world. And I think I mentioned that in that video as well. Now, Russia, second biggest land-based missile forces on Earth. And I mean, when I say the forces overall, I'm talking when you combine both the nuclear-equipped, the nuclear ICBMs, along with all the conventionally equipped ICBMs, but also the cruise missiles as well. Cruise missiles are also part of that. So cruise missiles and ballistic missiles comprise these missile forces. Then you have their combat air fleet, China, the biggest combat air fleet in the world, biggest and by far the most technologically advanced. They're now beginning to put electronic warfare systems on the H-6K strategic heavy bombers as well. And China has some very potent electronic jamming pods. They already equipped them and upgraded all their JH-7 Flying Leopards, which are their key ground attack aircraft that they have. But they also they have the J-16D, which is basically a multi-role electronic strike aircraft. Now, that is extremely effective in suppressing enemy air defenses. And I'm talking about your things like Patriot missile batteries, which is basically like the standard air defense system that the United States and a lot of its allies employ. Systems like the Patriot missile systems, or even the older Hawk missile systems that some of our other allies still have, the radars that go to those systems, the J-16D has some very effective jamming technology on board. And it's not just their air-based jamming systems, very similar, by the way, to the Russian Kirkuk systems. It's hard to say those Russian words, very hard. They also have, the Russians also have the Murmansk system. Chinese have something. It's like the EG 600 or 650, something like that. I can't remember the exact name of it. I've said it before, and I've got it wrote down on one of my many thousands of pieces of scrap paper somewhere. But I really got to keep that stuff in better track. In fact, I've got a whole bunch of it sitting in front of me right now. But besides that, the Chinese have some really effective land-based systems, such as at their installation on Mumian Island, which is the installation housing some of the land-based systems that were used against the F-35s that strayed into the radius of their antenna-based systems on Mumian, which caused them to almost crash. And I've mentioned that before. They try to cover that up because it's so embarrassing, but it really did happen. Whether media wants to admit it or not. Same thing with the USS Donald Cook. That didn't just happen once, but it happened twice to the same ship. And that was done by Russia, obviously, in the Black Sea. Same place, same ship, same nation, jamming our ship, Russia. So Russia and China both have these incredibly advanced electronic warfare systems. Now, in Ukraine, Russia hasn't even employed these yet. They haven't even employed these yet. But when they do, these will make their full-on invasion go incredibly smooth. Because, again, like I was saying, I was going to talk about integration of systems, but also, interoperability of different forces, even like the Chinese and Russian forces having incredible interoperability because of all the military drills like Zapad and like the naval drills that they've been doing in the Pacific around Japan. All of these military drills and also naval patrols, actual military missions, all the missions and drills that China and Russia do together has to do with forming bonds, forming interoperability of their forces. And that plays a big role in any missions where forces of different languages, different equipment, different nationalities have to work together, like as a coalition. Like, for instance, we had interoperability with NATO because of the NATO mission in Afghan while we were there for like 20 years. There was a lot of interoperability between the different forces in Afghan. That took their own little sectors and worked together and even sometimes stayed on the same fobs together, sort of like in Iraq also. There was interoperability between forces from different nations in Iraq, At one point, you even had the Italians, you even had the Spaniards from Spain. Even the Spanish were in Iraq too, but the Spaniards sort of pulled out after that Madrid attack in the Madrid subway. That's what caused them to pull out. They didn't have the resolve to keep going after that happened. That was what did it for them. So they withdrew, and then Eventually, the Italians withdrew, and then basically all that was left after some of the NATO nations that did decide to sign on to it left. All that was basically there until about the very end of it was the US, the UK, and I think the Australians were still there too. I seen a lot of Australians and UK troops at Camp Buring in Kuwait as I was going into Iraq, and we even had, I think, several from Georgia, the country Georgia. I think they were on our fob on Caldwell. It was one of those ex-Soviet nations. I can't remember. I think it was Georgia, but they were part of it too. We had a few of them on our fob. I think we had about like 3 or so. There wasn't very many, but they did send people. I think they worked in Intel or something because they were in our talk a lot. The TOC, that was like the fob communication and command post basically. But I couldn't tell you exactly what their job was as it relates to their military, but I did see them there. But that's neither here nor there. So I'm going to go back to discussing China and why they're such a massive threat. There was a point where China, they had they had some 2,400 something aircraft. Let me get that paper. Let me find that. I just had that paper. Hold on. Yeah, it was an old figure I had them having some over 2,400 aircraft, but come to find out, they have the H-20 bomber that they're working on, but they also had some aircraft that they had stored away. Like they had these J-8-2Bs. They have 410 of those. And so if you put that with all the other numbers, they have 2,852 aircraft. 2,852 aircraft for their combat air fleets. So they have their J-8-2Bs, 410. There's J-10 fighters, 600. There's the J-11s, 500. There's J-15s, 150. JF-17s, even though that's a largely export plane, they have about 170 of those. Those are newer. They have J-20s. They have over 200 J-20s. The stealth fighters, they have 400 JH-7s, having had produced a grand total of 2,400 JH-7s, but I can't speak for the other 2,000. It doesn't, the figures never gave whether those were sold off, put into storage, or what happened to them, or if they were just retired. It didn't say. But they have 400 in active service. And then, of course, they have Q-5s. They had produced a grand total of 1,300 Q-5s, but they only have 600 of those left. Then their J-16s, they have 175 J-16s, and that includes the J-16Ds, the electronic multi-role strike aircrafts. So they're like basically a ground attack, like a fighter bomber, a tactical strike aircraft, but it's electronic. It's made with electronic warfare in mind, about jamming electronics radars and whatever else, and striking air defense sites, things like that. Then there's the 242 H-6K heavy strategic bombers, and then the number of H-20 stealth bombers is ungiven. It's not available yet. That's probably a classified amount. They have started production, but there's no number given for those. So China's fleet of attack, or not attack, well, yeah, attack, but their combat air fleet is enormous. And all the aircraft I just mentioned are all very capable. Even the J-8-2Bs, even though they're not like a even though they're pretty old, they're highly upgraded. They even have like a new radar nose cone put on instead of like the old, the old like they were based off of like a MiG 21 airframe, but they were completely a Chinese made aircraft. But they upgraded those and actually put a whole radar suite on it, and they even upgraded the interior with like all new computer systems, all like LED based systems and everything. I mean, like the stuff that they have done, but they're older, and they're probably the ones that they have were probably passed down to like reserve air units, because China has a hell of a lot of newer, better aircraft, like the J-10s, the J-11s, the J-16s, the JF-17s, the J-20s. Those are all vastly modern, very, very potent aircraft, all of them in the fighter category, and even in the ground attack role. Both the J-16D, which is the electronic warfare, the electronic strike aircraft, ground attack aircraft, in that role, it's very, very potent, and so is the JH-7, and even the upgraded Q-5s, which are now like a second line strike aircraft for ground attack. Even those are still very effective in that role, like being upgraded. So the older ones, like the J811Bs and the Q5s, even though those are older aircraft, they're still very effective, even in the hands of reserve units, because remember, China upgrades all their older stuff and they pass it down. They don't really ever completely get rid of things. They make them very much better, and then they pass them down the line, while the mainstream forces, the active duty forces, get all the cream of the crop stuff, and so do some of the reserves as well. Not all the reserves, of course, but because their reserves are freakishly huge at 5 million, and that's for all their services, but in the sense of their active duty, and I'd say about half of their reserve forces, they get all the brand new stuff that comes off the production lines, all the cream of the crop, state of the art, state of the industry stuff that China's mass producing. That's given to the category A, which is like the top tier forces, and category B forces, which are the a lot of those units are like reserves, category B. Then, of course, you have like category C forces, which are like your home defense forces, which are like your paramilitary national militia, or the marine militia, or your national construction corps, which is basically like a combat / civil engineering force, like what the combat and civil engineers in the army do. That would be like a parallel military version of those same type of forces with that type of a mission. Because China really has two militaries. They have a parallel military, which is their paramilitary, and then they have their regular military. It's enormous. They have 29 million men under arms, which is their 20 million man paramilitary forces, and then their regular military, which is the 4 million active duty military, plus the 5 million man reserves. And, it's not just with aircraft. China does the same thing with all of their older systems. They make them a lot better than their original iterations. They heavily upgrade these things, and they just pass them on down the line until they keep getting pushed down as newer, better stuff, like brand spanking new, cream of the crop, state of the art stuff comes off the production lines. They just keep passing down the older, upgraded stuff. That's why they have such an enormous armed forces. Can you imagine trying to even equip a force like that? How hard that would be? I mean, that's why China has this enormous manufacturing base, so that they can now begin to and remember, they've only really had it for 5 years, because all of these massive factory complexes that they started work on at the end of the 90s and started completing work on by, it took them a long time to build all these. They started completing work around the 2017, 2018 timeframe. So for about 5 years, they've had this enormous capacity to manufacture things. So they've been cranking out enormous amounts of hardware. It's not just aircraft, it's tanks, it's armor personnel carriers, it's infantry fighting vehicles. And now they're building a new strategic heavy bomber that's a stealth bomber. I mean, like they're building all kinds of things, and they have 1,200 shipyards. Their shipyards, any and or all of them can be retooled at a moment's notice to all crank out military ships. All of them, according to their civil military fusion policy, which also affects their CCP properties in other nations, where they can all become bases, like all the properties they own in the United States. They're the biggest landowner in the United States. And even their ships, like their cargo ships or even cruise liners can be used as troop transports, or in the case of cargo ships, they could transport vehicles or munitions, supplies, whatever else. I mean, just everything they have, their whole nation at a moment's notice can be geared towards war. They can turn bus and automotive plants into plants that produce extra ground vehicles. I mean, not that they would need to, because they already have the biggest tank fleet in the world. They already have the biggest armored fighting vehicle, infantry fighting vehicle, and APC fleet in the world. And they, coupled with Russia as well, have about the same amount of artillery. And both of them have the world's biggest artillery forces. So China is a monster. People in the West have no idea. They greatly underestimate our enemies, especially in the case of China, because China is just enormous. I mean, they're massively bigger than we are in basically every category that even matters. Sure, our Air Force might be a little bit bigger than theirs, but that's the only reason is because we have this large cargo aircraft fleet. We have this huge air mobility command fleet, which is all our cargo planes. We have a lot of cargo planes because we have to deploy forces around the world rapidly, and because we have all these overseas commitments and bases and things. But not that China has a small cargo plane fleet, but it's nowhere near as big as ours. But China mostly focuses on combat aircraft, so their priorities is in their combat power, but they're starting to try to catch up in the cargo plane category as well as the mid-air refueler fleet category. They have mid-air refuelers, they have cargo planes, they have all that stuff. They have AWACS, they have all of that. They have trainers, for training pilots. They have all kinds of support aircraft just like we do, but they don't have the numbers of support aircraft that we have. But they outnumber us in combat aircraft, and that's all categories. They outnumber us in strategic heavy bombers. They outnumber us in tactical ground attack aircraft, fighter bombers. They outnumber us in fighters. They outnumber us in combat planes by a lot, by between, what is 1,000, 1,200? Let me get the paper. They outnumber us by 1,150 aircraft. So that's a lot, and I'm talking about in the combat plane category. But in helicopters, that's the only other area where we have any sort of lead over them. We have more helicopters than they do, but they're starting to catch up in that category. But that doesn't matter, though, really, because they have the countermeasures for our helicopters. They have put a lot of money and production capability into producing enormous amounts of air defense weapons for the express purpose of swatting everything down from helicopters to aircraft. China has an enormous air defense arm, and their air defense missiles are very potent. Their radars are potent. I mean, electronically, China and Russia are both very capable nations. I would say they're probably the two most capable when it comes to electronic warfare, radar development, all of that. And they're both about the same in that category, really. But China has an even bigger air defense arm than anybody else, and same could be said for their electronic warfare. So China is leading in the numbers game for the most part. They basically lead in everything. I mean, Russia and us are the only two nations that have more helicopters than China, but in everything else, China's basically leading in everything that matters in terms of combat capability. China's leading, and by a huge margin. Now, back to their production capacity, they lead the world in titanium production and by far in tungsten production. And I've already talked about tungsten's applications across the board when it comes to weaponry, when it comes to armor in vehicles. They can make tungsten and steel alloys with, of course, a binding agent, like whether it's nickel or some other type of binding agent. And, they can make these types of armors and steel penetrators for sabot rounds for like tank ammunition or whatever else. You can make tungsten bullets that have anti-materiel value. And those are some of the best bullets that you could make as far as in the armor piercing category. But China leads the world by a long shot in tungsten production. They produce 66,000 metric tons of tungsten, whereas you have the next biggest producer being Vietnam, which produces only 4,500, and China's 66,500, or no, not 500, just 66,000 tons, metric tons, not full tons. And titanium, where's that paper at? Titanium was something like 110,000 metric tons. It wasn't full tons. Like their steel production is over 1 billion tons of steel, like regular tons, what they call imperial tons, I guess. But the metric tons is their titanium and their tungsten production. That's in metric tons. 66,000 for tungsten, 110,000 for titanium. And they lead in those three categories. They lead in steel by a long shot, by a huge gulf. They lead in tungsten by a huge gulf, and they lead in titanium. But it's not as big of a gap with the titanium as it is with like the tungsten production and the steel production, which obviously all three of those metals have a lot of military applications. And China leads the world in chemical production too, and chemicals are used in everything, especially in military applications. Obviously, you use chemicals and different processes for making other things, or you use it to make explosives or even chemical weapons, but not that they need chemical weapons. I mean, they have these enormous forces, these enormous conventional forces. They have hypersonics. They lead the world in the development of lasers and directed energy weapons. They lead the world in AI. They lead the world in robotics. And they lead the world in cyber warfare and electronic warfare, which, cyber deals with the hacking, and electronic warfare is the application of jamming electronics or intercepting communications as well. Electronic warfare has actually several different applications when it comes to the battlefield, and even communications themselves, when it comes to encrypted communications and things like that. So there's all kinds of things that make China an enormous threat. So that's why I'm constantly always reporting on them. And their tank fleet is just freakishly massive. I mean, they have a total of 19,300 main battle tanks. That's everything that they have active and in storage for like their reserve units and their paramilitary units. That's all their main battle tanks. They have 19,300 main battle tanks, and they have 3,800 light tanks, and there are three categories of light tanks. That's their Type 62Gs, and most of their light tanks have been passed down by this point to paramilitary. The Type 62G tanks, the Type 62Gs and the Type 63 amphibious tanks are older tanks. The Type 63, the Type 62Gs are heavily upgraded tanks. But the new Type 15 tank is a brand new light tank. Then they also have the Type 59, which is the tank they actually have the most of. They have 8,000 left of the Type 59D, which has been it's not even recognizable from the original Type 59. All the things that they have done to that tank now, like all the new periscopes and ballistic computers and gun stabilization, the laser range finders, the communications on board, like the radios, the just everything that they've done to it, the added ERA armor kits, and just everything, the types of shells they can fire, the type of gun they use. The gun they use is actually an L7, which is a 105 millimeter gun that was found on Western tanks, like especially like old British and American tanks, like the M60A3 used an L7 gun, for instance. That was one of our old tanks, the M60. They even used the M60 in the Gulf War. The original L7 gun is shorter than the one that they've put on the Type 59D and also the Type 69, 79 series. And they even on the Type 80/88 they had a 105, but then on the 85 iteration, which is where you started to see a more modern turret design, they put a 125 millimeter gun on that, a whole new gun. Then you got the Type 96 tanks and the Type 99s. But of the older tanks, like the Type 59Ds that are older and massively upgraded, they're massively upgraded. The older, more upgraded tanks like the 59Ds and the 69, 79 series, which they still have a pretty ample amount of sitting around. I mean, they've upgraded the shit out of those tanks. So they have, between the 69, 79 and the 59D, they have about 10,000 of those when combining the 8,000 remaining Type 59Ds with the 2,000 69, 79 series. And then the Type 80/88/85, they have 1,800 of those. 600 of those out of that 1,800 are the Type 85s, which are where you're starting to get newer turret designs before the Type 96 came out, and then the Type 99. And the Type 99A is the newest iteration of the Type 99 series, and then Type 96B is the newest iteration of the Type 96 series. Now they have 5,000 of their two newest tanks. They have 5,000 96s, and they've got 2,500 Type 99s currently, right now. And out of the 1,800 of the 80, 85, 88 series, of those 600 of those that are of the 85 iteration, they have 600 of them combined with the 7,500 of the 96 and 99 series when you combine the 96, 99, which are their two newest designs. So all in all, they have over, what would that be? They have 8,100 newer tanks, like brand new tanks, essentially. If you're taking the 85s, 96s, and 99s. With they all have about the same weapons capabilities. They have the same 125 millimeter gun, which can shoot the same ammunition. They have the same ballistic computers, but the 96 and 99 have better armor, and they have they have a whole host of just newer ballistic computers, fire control systems in them, communications. The engines are also very good. I have a whole video on that too, if y'all are interested. I have the Chi-Com tank video. I have a lot of stuff I put in that video with the technical specifications of these different tanks. Because they have so many tanks, I went over the different models and, as quick as I could, but, I tried to include as much as I could on the specific technical data with the engines and what the horsepower was, the mileage, all that stuff. But China has an enormous tank fleet. Russia has the second biggest tank fleet. So both Russia and China are an enormous threat. Now, when you talk about the missiles that they have, there's no counter to their hypersonics. There is no counter. And in the case of China, they've gone beyond just your standard hypersonic cruise and ballistic missiles. They have a basically a fractional orbital bombardment system, which means that the missile can circumnavigate the Earth. It can just fly in a circle around the Earth and hit its target as it launches a hypersonic glide vehicle to, for the rest of the route, and it can maneuver in there and hit its target. And they've tested this thing a couple different times, and they've perfected it. I mean, they have this. Nobody else has tested it, or if they have it, they haven't tested it. And Russia hasn't tested anything like that I'm aware of. I've never heard of it. I heard of the Soviet Union trying to work on a fractional orbital bombardment project way back in the day, but they never completed it. I mean, I'm sure that they have it, but China is the only one to have ever tested it and perfected it. So China has a working fractional orbital bombardment system, in addition to the hypersonic weapons that they have as well, just the standard cruise missile and ballistic missile varieties. Like they have the medium-range DF-17s. They've got the DF-ZF missiles. Where is that at? Where's that thing? Hold on, I have it written down. These papers. Here it is. They have the DF-100, which is a hypersonic cruise missile. They have the DF-ZF, which turns any missile into a hypersonic, because what it is it's a hypersonic glider warhead that can be fit onto conventional missiles and basically turns the missile itself into a hypersonic, because once that detaches, it flies the rest of the flight path extremely fast and in a random pattern, which is why hypersonic missiles are so effective, is because not only are they traveling at a high rate of speed, but they're maneuvering in random flight paths the entire way to their target. That's what makes them so revolutionary on the battlefield. A lot of people don't understand it, but that's why they're such a big deal. There's really no defense for them. The DF-17, yeah, that's a medium-range ballistic missile, and they have one other model. It's not wrote on that paper. Damn, it's like a longer-range one. And of course, the Russians, they've got their Kinzhal, they've got the Zircon. They've got a bunch. Yeah, the electronic jamming pods that China has on the aircraft is called a KG-600, not an EG-600. It's called a KG-600. My bad, my fault. I mentioned that earlier. I should fix that while I see it on the paper. There's just so many papers, y'all. It's not even funny. Well, anyway, I haven't even looked at the chat yet. See what everybody's even saying. I've been going on for a long time here. Hey, Aaron. Oh yeah, it's no problem, Aaron Mercer. I'm glad to do it. Hey, Boris and AK-47 and just me or just man. Yeah. Well, remember, Chechnya is part of Russia, so. And Chechnya has committed troops to the Wagner group, because Chechnya is a semi-autonomous region in Russia. They've committed forces to the Russian cause. Russia and Chechnya really amended relations, internal relations, after their conflict. They actually had a few wars over Chechnya, but they mended their internal relations after that civil war. Yeah, they're busy, Boris. They're moving all kinds of stuff. Same with China. China's moving all sorts of stuff into the Balkans, into Serbia. I mean, everywhere the Xi Jinping propaganda goes, there's Chi-Com troops. But we also know there's Chi-Com troops there because Chinese cargo aircraft made nonstop runs from China all the way to Serbia and back, delivering troops and supplies and weapons. Same with Montenegro. We know that China has sway over Montenegro because Montenegro was part of the Belt and Road, and they defaulted. It's public record too. They defaulted on the superhighway that China built through Montenegro. So we know what happens when people default on Chi-Com projects. They got to pay the piper. Well, China, they're using Montenegro to get forces into the Balkans, just like how we use Kuwait to get forces into the in the Middle East. They got a port there. They just bring their troops to the port. Like, I'm talking like their heavy armor and such. They just unload it off the cargo ships and just drive it on into Serbia. So again, the Russian allies, China, Serbia, some of the CSTO nations that have been to the summit in Samarkand in Uzbekistan, they know what's coming in Ukraine. They've been told they've been told that Russia has plans to invade the rest of Ukraine and bring it all to a close, because Russia said at the summit that they fully intended to bring this thing to a close relatively quickly. So that entails that there's going to be some sort of full-scale invasion, and especially when you combine that with the fact that they're telling their citizens and their diplomatic staff to get out of Ukraine, that definitely tells you that there's a full-scale invasion coming. And if you even had a doubt after knowing that, then add to that that Russia is actually forming a larger force than what we entered Iraq with in the initial phase. I mean, the actual initial 3-week-long invasion phase of OIF when we invaded Iraq to overthrow Saddam. Yeah, that was 160,000 troops that between America and its allies across the border, with tens of thousands more in Kuwait and Saudi who supported the operation, like your Air Force pilots and your cooks, your everything, that were over there, and your forces that ran the installations like Camp Buehring and the port facilities at Al Shawaiba and wherever else throughout Kuwait, Ali Al Salim, all the air, naval, and land forces that supported logistically the operations in Saudi and Kuwait, along with the 160,000 that crossed the borders, comprised the 200-odd thousand troops, the 220,000 troops. Yesterday, I made a mistake. It was like 220,000 total were involved if you include logistical personnel, like support personnel. But the troops that actually crossed into Iraq is 160,000. I made sure to type that out in the description box of the last video. I wanted to get that. I want to make sure that was, understood. So the purpose for me even saying those things was to convey that, 300,000 additional troops building up in Belgorod and also in southern Belarus. That's a big deal. That definitely indicates a major invasion force, because Russia wouldn't be building up that many troops. They wouldn't have called up 300,000 reserves, for nothing. They're doing also major buildups in Belgorod and in the southern border regions in Belarus. That's a full indication with everything else that I just said, that, as far as the foreign nationals that are Russian allies being told to get their people out of Ukraine, that's a full indication that there's going to be a full-scale invasion. And then, you couple that with the weather conditions, I expect it within 2 to 4 weeks. I mean, realistically, I expect it within, 2 weeks to about a month. 2 weeks to a month, 4 weeks. That's when I expect it personally. I would really be surprised if it took any longer than a month. I really would. Now, would they wait a little longer? I mean, there's no telling. Maybe they would, just so that they could give an element of surprise. I don't know. I don't know what their plans are. Like I said, I would love to be, an insect in the room, in the briefing room, in the map room where they conduct their strategy meetings and their planning sessions. I would love to see what they're actually planning, strategy-wise, but nobody's going to know that. Nobody's going to know all that. I would like to, but I can only offer reasonable guesses and the reasons why. So those are my reasons for the 2 weeks to about a month. That would seem to be the most reasonable estimate. I don't expect them to wait too long, only because at their summit, they spoke with all their allies, the Russian people too. Not just Russian allies, but the Russian people themselves have been demanding that the leaders of Russia bring this thing to a swift close. They're tired of it. They're tired of Russia going soft on Ukraine. They want to see them do something decisive. And, I think that the reason why they did it the way they did it, going in soft like that, was so they could get their people behind them, because they wanted, part of that. I mean, that's not the full reason, but that's part of the reason. They wanted their people to fully back them in their endeavor, because if they're going to take a step like that to invade somebody, I mean, you're going to want your people behind you. The last thing you want is getting embroiled in a conflict and your people don't even back you on it. That's why they went in slow. I mean, that's one reason. And I mean, it's a big reason, but it's, and it's not the only reason, but it's a big reason as to why they went in slow. Plus, limited incursion means less losses overall in the grand scheme of things, because in war, you're always going to lose something in war. Even if you win a war decisively, you're still going to have losses. And I think they went in soft because, part of that was to reduce their materiel losses, their losses of personnel, all of it. But I think now, after grinding down the Ukrainian armed forces for so long, also basically rope-a-doping the West, distracting the West, as like I've always called it. Other people said it was a rope-a-dope. It's same thing. After doing what they've done all these months, the Ukrainian people are tired. They're tired. They're wore out from this. That they've thrown everything they've had in the kitchen sink at the Russians, and all to no avail. And Russia hasn't even begun to try yet, which means that them building up these enormous forces to the north of Ukraine signifies that really Russia has done nothing yet. They've committed nothing yet in terms of personnel and resources. They have enormous resources conventionally and otherwise, but conventionally they have enormous resources to commit to war, because they have conventional weapons they haven't even used yet. I mean, enormous amounts of them. And also types of conventional weapons they really haven't relied on yet, like their electronic warfare. Like they have some potent electronic warfare systems. They haven't cranked those things on yet. And even if they haven't really used them that much, or really, just doesn't look like they've used them at all, because if they'd have used them, Ukrainians would have no ability to communicate. I bet you most of their stuff wouldn't even work, if at all. I mean, they'd be up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. But after all the missiles, even though it was a limited incursion, they did use quite a lot of missiles and a shit ton of artillery shells and rockets in this conflict. It's largely been a missile and artillery conflict up to this point. But I think that things are about to change dramatically. I think things are going to change in a way to where people are going to see what mobile warfare, like full-on mobile warfare, looks like, what it really looks like. I'm coming from Russia, because Russia, building up 300,000 troops, it'll just overwhelm whatever's even left. It's just going to overwhelm them. I mean, they don't, realistically, in all reality, and this is a fact, Ukraine does not have the resources remaining to fend off a major invasion from 300,000 troops. I mean, Russia only to this point has used 63 to 65,000 troops in their 70 combat battalions. That's it. That's it. That's all they've used up to this point. And that's not very many troops in the grand scheme of their overall military size, but that's all that they've sent inside of Ukraine. 300,000 troops in addition to that is enormous. That's enormous. If the whole nation of Ukraine had such a hard time managing these 63, 65,000 troops, and I'm going by average Russian battalion sizes, so it can be anywhere between 63 to 65,000. If they had such a hard time dealing with a force that's that small, how are they going to manage against 300,000 more in addition to what they're already fighting? How are they going to manage that? They're not. There's no way. There's no way. There's no realistic way they can. They've been ground down to bare bones. How now can they stop realistically, how can they stop 300,000 troops just thrown into the mix? That would be so overwhelming in the state that they're in. It would even be psychologically overwhelming to NATO to watch their proxy just get basically mowed down like that when these enormous hordes of troops pour over the northern borders into Ukraine. That's why I'm saying I don't see once this starts, I don't see NATO daring to try anything else. I see them just totally disintegrating after this, because you like Jens Stoltenberg said, it would be a fail for NATO if Russia came out on top. Well, it looks like NATO is going to fail, because it'll be such a major psychological blow. Really think about it. For all the Western nations to have done all the sanctions that they could possibly do to Russia, and that actually not have had the desired effect, really no effect at all, because Russia just turned to their other allies and traded with them instead, even more than they already were. Imagine the psychological blow in Western nations when not only does their proxy totally lose overwhelmingly, but imagine the psychological blow that they were able to achieve none of what they set out to do. They weren't able to take Russia down economically or financially. They weren't able to defeat them militarily with a proxy. They expended enormous amounts of resources into another lost cause, like Afghanistan, like Iraq, like Syria. Just imagine that for a second. All these months later, after all the resources dumped into that, all the money given to them, for them to lose this thing would be an enormous blow to the collective psyche of NATO. They wouldn't be able to stand it. I see NATO completely disintegrating bit by bit after this. And there's really nothing they can do to stop Russia at this point. It's too late. It's too late. They've given away so much of the munitions stockpiles that they had. They have nothing left to give. They have nothing left to give. I think they know it. They're just not going to say it. That's where the narrative comes into play with, Russia's losing, so they're going to lose. They're going to use nukes. That's where it becomes reckless and irresponsible for them to say that, because, they know they're lying. They know they're lying out of their teeth. They're telling a bald-faced lie that Russia's losing, when in fact, they haven't even begun to try yet. They're telling a bald-faced lie, and then they have to back up their lie by saying that, Russia's going to use nukes, just so they could back up their other narrative that Russia's losing. But that's reckless, Even if they don't pull a nuclear false flag, it's still reckless, and it's going to make them lose every last shred of credibility they have when it doesn't happen. That's why, that would be. See, there's only two options for them at this point, and I'm talking about NATO. There's only two options left for them. They either do a nuke FF and risk, being destroyed completely as a result of that, or they just lose. They just accept. They eat their humble pie and accept that they lost. And I'm talking about these Western elites. They either eat their humble pie, accept that they lost, that they'll never be able to balkanize and break apart Russia, that they'll never have regime change there, or whatever all other plans they had for them. They'll have to eat their humble pie, or they are that stupid and reckless to where they would start a nuclear conflict. But I don't think it'll go there because there's so many other things that have to happen first. We haven't collapsed yet, and I think that's going to be one of the things that really lead into our collapse is the loss in Ukraine. I think that's going to be the last straw that really leads into the full-on collapse of the whole collective West as an entity. I think that's going to be what does it. I really do at this point. Because you got to understand just the tandem blow. Because look, it's not just the loss of a proxy. It's also the economic and financial damage that it did to us in the process. Because when the sanctions boomeranged onto us. They hurt us. They didn't even hurt Russia. Russia economically, their ruble, and financially, the ruble's doing better than it ever has. Russia's the second biggest gold holder in the world and the biggest commodities holder. It ain't hurting them. They've got major allies to trade with, like China, the world's superpower with the biggest real economy on Earth. They have the biggest economy in the world. China does, in real terms. They surpassed us years ago, economically too. I even put that chart up from 2019, has the 2019 numbers on it. And most of our economy is built on usury and debt and credit. It just in general, it's fake. It's made out of funny money. It's a house of cards. And in 2020, when they did the Lyris scam, we lost a third of our whole economy right then and there, because the small business was, after we lost all our industry and we deindustrialized, I mean, like not all of it, but we lost like most of it. After we were massively deindustrialized, the small business became like the full backbone of the U.S. economy. And when they did the Lyris scheme, it just yanked that out from under us. I mean, we lost all these small businesses. We lost a third of our nation's GDP. I mean, it was disastrous. It was disastrous because of all the people that had to close their livelihoods down, and they got shafted for doing it. Corporations managed, and maybe some of the business owners that, had some money put back for hard times, maybe, or they just had such good business or a business model or a really good business model that helped them survive all that. But by and large, enormous small businesses went out of business, and they could never come back. So that set us up for where we are now. And with the sanctions boomeranging like that, they hurt the West. They didn't even hurt Russia. Russia stabilized, and in fact, they've come out stronger for it. What does that say? So to lose in Ukraine would be more than just a psychological blow on the West. It'll be a blow to the defense capabilities, the whatever little bit of industry we might have had. It'll be a blow to that. It'll be a blow because all the factories in Western Europe are shuttering because they can't even afford the energy costs. The demand is there, but the supply's not there because they did that to themselves with the sanctions. And the sabotage and the stealing of the oil refineries that were owned by Russian oil companies. Germany stole their refineries. I mean, all the liquid assets, the $300 billion of Russian money that was in Western banks that they stole. I mean, was it really worth it? I mean, man, it was a bad choice to get involved in this thing. It only hurt our people. It didn't hurt nobody but our people. And that's why I'm amazed that anybody can sit there and be a cheerleader for this thing and think that it's okay or good or whatever. It's not good. It's not good from any perspective. It's not good on the Russian side. It's not good on the Ukrainian side. I'm just telling the truth. I'm just telling raw facts and figures. And the truth is a lot different from how the media paints it. I don't understand how anybody can take media seriously at this point, with the bias they have, with the narratives they're constantly telling. The media companies are owned by the Western elites. Why would anybody listen to mouthpieces of Western media narratives? Because these media companies are owned by the West, by the Western elites. I wouldn't listen to the Eastern media either. But I'm just saying that you have to find real facts and figures to paint your own picture. And the picture is exactly what I just described to you. That's a fact. It's a fact. It's a fact. It's a fact. And I'm not, to take a page from my friend Ken, I'm not going to say that I'm not going to say that I'm going to be vindicated, but I will say this much. I'll say that I have a pretty damn good track record when it comes to the information on my channel. The way that, the predictions and why I make those predictions, it's based off of solid information. I mean, yeah, there might be some margin of error, but I mean, it's nothing major. I mean, for the most part, I have a hell of a great track record. We're all human, but I mean, my research is on point. It's solid. I always present real facts and figures. I mean, but as a man, I make predictions based off of information. And, I might occasionally, might miss something here and there because I'm not perfect. But, I mean, damn, I'm pretty on point with this stuff. And I have to say that I'm not going to say I'll be vindicated, but I'm going to say I'll be proven correct on a lot of what's coming. I'll be proven correct. And I'm not saying that to boast or be arrogant. I'm just saying it because it's a fact. I'm just being honest. I'm not going to lie and say that, I don't know if I'll be right or not. No, I'm certain to the point where I know I'm right, about this stuff, about this military related and everything else that I'm talking about on this channel, because that's my wheelhouse. That's what I'm good at. That's what I stick to because I'm good at it. And I am more than certain that what I'm telling you all is going to happen will happen. And I told you why. I've given you ample reasons why that's going to be the case. Ample reasons. Not speculation, reasons. Actual facts and figures reasons, like real solid, concrete reasons why things will be this way. People might not like my presentation style, or they might not like this, or they may not like that. Okay, fine. You don't have to like me. But the information is the information. It's not about me. It's not even about me. It's about the information. And it's good information that would behoove everybody to listen to. It would behoove everybody to listen to it. Because it's all fact. It's all fact. And any speculation I do on my part, it's based on fact. So, I'm telling you all, man. I'm telling you. This might be the straw that breaks the West, because that's where I was going with all that I just said just a minute ago. This might be the straw that breaks the West, because this achieved nothing for us as a block of nations. This actually literally achieved nothing. And if Russia does its full-scale invasion, and I know they will, because they're building up for it, all things indicate that this is about to happen. It's about to happen. When they do this, it's going to be such a major blow to the West that I see NATO coming to an end very soon. I really do. This is going to be the thing. It might even undo the EU, the European Union. Might even be undone from this. And I'm not even joking about that. And that'll have as much to do with all the social problems that already existed there to begin with, as it will to do with losing this thing and all the sanctions backfiring and never, ever being able to be reconciled or repaired. Russia and Europe will never have the relationship that they once had because Russia's never going to trust Europe again. They're never going to trust the EU again. They're never going to sell EU fuel like they did in the past again. And if they do, they're going to jack the rates up way high to where it'll cost them an arm and a leg. They will never have the type of benefits that they had before they started involving themselves in this. Never. It's basically over for Europe at this point. They're never going to have the same relationship with Russia that they had before this entire thing began. That's what I'm getting at. So this might be the end of the EU. It'll definitely be the end of NATO. Nobody will ever trust NATO again to do anything because after a long string of failures, how could anybody? I mean, realistically, how could anybody put any faith in NATO after everything? You know, it's a whole string of things. It's a disaster. It's been a disaster. You know, and NATO nations, it's not like they're anything like they used to be. They all castrated themselves. They all totally forsook their militaries. They used to have strong militaries in Western Europe. They all totally forsook their entire... They've forsaken their whole... Just everything that they've once had has been just pissed away in one bad roll of the dice. It's like they're sitting at a card table and they betted everything on, you know, not just the United States picking up their slack, but they betted everything else on this whole misadventure in Eastern Europe. They betted everything. They bet everything on the wrong gambles, on the wrong gambles. See, they expected us to pick up their slack for them, but because we've castrated our own military now, and the militaries of Western Europe and even ours have given away all these stocks of ammunition, vital ammunition, by the way, that can't be replaced, anti-tank weapons, rocket artillery ammunition, especially in our case, giving away a whole third of our rocket artillery ammo, probably up to more than that by now. It's probably more like half by now. Giving away 2 million shells, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. The last known count of Russian shells expended was 3,600,000 plus. But up, you know, realistically at 20,000 shells a day, it's over 4 million by now. Well over 4 million shells that Russia has expended, and they've never stopped. They've been doing the same thing. And this is just a limited incursion for now. The full-scale invasion hasn't even begun yet. You know, these 300,000 troops are building up. The missiles they've expended has been massive, well in excess of 2,000 missiles. So they've expended thousands, plural, of missiles. You know, and still going, still going. They're not even close to running out of anything yet. So the media, all those months ago, said, oh, Russia's doing bad, you know, they're running out of everything. Bullshit. Bullshit. They're still going. And they can't even make up good lies to cover up their old lies saying Russia was running out. Now they're saying goofy shit like they're getting shells from North Korea. What a joke. What a freaking joke. They wouldn't have expended so many shells if they were going to run out. If they were going to run out anytime soon. We gave away 2 million. See, we project onto Russia what's actually stuff that would be happening with us. You know, like we don't have probably anywhere near 4 million shells. We've given away 2 million. I mean, that in all likelihood, that's probably 2/3 of the shells we have. I'm not talking about what we can produce in a year either. I'm just saying like the stockpiles that we had sitting around, just the stocks that are sitting in the ammo bunkers and the ammo dumps. I mean, to give away just 2 million like that, that's ridiculous. giving away platforms. I mean, that's one thing, and giving away some shells, but I mean, 2 million shells. I mean, we do not produce that many shells a year. We didn't have the stockpiles that anywhere close to the stockpiles that the Soviet Union and then Russia had after the collapse of the USSR. It was well understood that Russia outproduced the United States in the Cold War when it came to ammunition. Is well understood. And they haven't expended, like they've never really cleaned out their ammo dumps. Like not even in the Soviet-Afghan war did they clean out their ammo dumps like we did in Vietnam, and then in, the first Gulf War, second Gulf War, like all these conflicts, Afghanistan. I mean, look, it's known that they have enormous quantities of ammo, and that's just Russia. China has an even bigger industrial complex. And in their conflicts, they've really not expended very much ammo, because Chinese conflicts were never really like these enormous conflicts. I mean, yes, China invaded Vietnam, but that was a limited incursion. China had border wars with India, but those are very small-scale types of conflicts. China had internal conflicts against the Uyghurs out there in Xinjiang. They're still doing it, but those are being fought by like counterinsurgency forces, like their paramilitary version of the Waffen SS, which is basically their people armed police. I mean, look, China that just drastically outproduces Russia in arms and munitions. And Russia already produces, they have the second biggest military industrial complex in terms of output and everything. I mean, and the stocks they have from the USSR days were enormous. They're not anywhere near running out of anything. And if they were, they would have just gone to China for help. North Korea doesn't even have 1/8 of the size of what Russia's output is in munitions manufacturing. What a joke. That's a bad joke. It's not even like, I mean, okay, maybe a layman would believe something like that, but the trained eye, no, you would catch something like that and be like, what the hell are these people even talking about? This doesn't even make any sense. Same thing that the State Department said about them pressing Americans into service. What a joke. There would be so many problems inherent with that. Like, and I've went over those. If you want to watch that, go to the video with the thumbnail that has these Russian troops in formation. They're the Spetsnaz troops. You can tell by their beret color, and you could go and watch that one. And I mentioned all the issues that would be inherent with trying to do something like that. I'm not going to go over them all. I've been yapping for a long time. But, I mean, there's some serious ramifications for this entire thing. And it's coming to a head. And what it's going to lead to, and you know what? It might even coincide. It might even coincide with the collapse that we already knew was coming anyway. Because look, we're already in a food and fuel collapse. I mean, we have been since the end of August. We've been running horribly low on fuel and food since the end of August. What you see on the shelves, scraping the bottom of the barrel now. Same with the strategic reserve. Damn near emptied the whole thing. Damn near emptied out the whole thing. Between what's been hawked off to our enemy, China, plus India, plus, what's been given to the EU too, to top it all off, as if the other two weren't, bad enough. They had to make sure the EU got some. There's really, that's for a war or a national emergency. That's for war or a national emergency. And now we import more fuel than we actually produce in this country. Do you know how much money and effort and resources it would take to restart all the oil production in this country? It would be immense. It would be immense. Because you can't just neglect your oil fields like that, and your equipment, whatever equipment you had, can't just neglect all that and then just go back to it and then just lickety split. There's your you're pumping it all out again. No, it takes time. It takes time, money, effort, resources. That was the biggest mistake that I think we ever made. Was shutting down our own self-sufficiencies. I mean, just these people have been running us into the ground and then getting us involved in this BS overseas. No, man, no. It's not leading anywhere good. It's not leading us anywhere good. It benefits us in no kind of way. We need to focus on fixing ourselves, and we need to stay out of other parts of the world and let them do them, and we do us, take care of our own business. No. That's what's going to lead to our downfall, because we're going to piss them off to the point where they'll have more than enough justification to just go ahead and just knock us out. Because I could tell you, nations like China and Russia who wanted to take us over anyway, they're just looking for all the right reasons. That's all they're looking for. They need to be able to justify it to their people so that their people don't rise up against them for not wanting to be in some major war. We're giving them all kinds of justifications for their casus belli. So we need to, we're Mystery Babylon, so let's face it, it's not going to happen. We're not going to get our shit together. We're not going to fix our problems, and we're not going to, as a nation, get on our knees and repent because we're Mystery Babylon. Let's face it, half our population isn't trying to do any of that. But, if it were possible, it would sure be a nice thing, but, I'm not going to hold my breath. But I'm going to go ahead and see what everybody's saying here. Yeah, Tommy. Yeah, they would. They really would. They're a joke. Hey, Sylvia, great to see you. Yeah, you know what? I don't see any nuke stuff yet. It's just too soon for that. But I don't think it's anywhere near time for that yet. But what is going to happen is, all the Russians have to do is swiftly, before anything can be before there can even be a reaction, swiftly finish off Ukraine to where there can be no reaction, where there can be no FF. I'm sure that they're contemplating all those things when they're doing these plannings. These people contemplate all sorts of levels and of different planning. They act off of different intelligence. They, have to analyze various types of information, which goes into military planning when it comes to massive operations. On multiple levels too. On multiple levels, they're working out whatever kinks they have in this plan right now as they're building up their logistics, so that when it's finally time to give the op orders, their operation orders, they'll have something that will run not just very smoothly at the smallest up to the largest levels, but something that'll be as swiftly, just as swiftly as possible, as fast as possible. Because I see them wanting to hurry up and get this out of the way so that there really won't be any time for any kind of reactions whatsoever from the West, whether it's some sort of a false flag or whatever else. They're going to try and resolve this as quick as they can. I mean that. They're going to try and be lightning quick about this. I don't see them, dilly-dallying. If they're going to go all in, they're going to go all in, and they're going to do it quick. They're going to do it quick, fast, in a hurry. Because they'll really have no other option. Because the longer you take in a situation like that, where your enemy could consider doing something really stupid like that, the more it opens up that to a chance of happening. But I don't see them doing that. I think the Russians know what they're dealing with these Western elites. I'm positive they know what they're dealing with. But it's not that these Eastern elites running Russia or the CCP of China are any better. It's just that their plans are different from the plans of the Western elites. They want to take over the world. They want something to rule. They don't want to lose what they're trying to take over. They want to take over the world. But these Western elites are just reckless and haphazard, arrogant. I mean, they're suicidal because they're destroying their own countries, their own power base. So I think these Eastern elites know what they're dealing with in terms of their opponents, but I think they're really going to bring this thing to a really swift and decisive close. And when I say swift, I mean extremely rapid. No. Thanks, Tommy. I appreciate your compliments, man. I really do. A lot of people don't listen to me anymore like they used to. A lot of people have kind of, I don't know what it seems. It seems like a lot of people have parted ways with me. I don't know what it is. I guess I'm not. I don't know. I guess people don't like the way I present things, but I'm just talking about raw facts and figures. I don't know what I'm saying that people don't like. But I mean, then again, the truth and facts are never popular because people want to hold on to whatever they want to hold on to. I don't understand it. I sure don't understand it, but it's whatever. Oh boy. Hey Walter and Just Man and well thanks Tommy and thanks Patty. Yeah, they really don't, Patty. Yeah, and we're going to get invaded too. We're going to get invaded from all sides. Even the Bible talks about that with massive armies. China, Russia, all their smaller allies too. We're going to get invaded. I mean, yeah, sure. So, I mean, some nukes will be used, but according to the Bible, it's massive armies, massive conventional armies with whatever else is interspersed, because we know that Mystery Babylon, the city, see, there's the city and the nation of Mystery Babylon. The city of Babylon is like NYC. And, what's funny about that is there's even actually a sub-city in that metro area that's called Babylon. It's got its own water tower and everything. It says Babylon on it. If you don't need any more signs than that, that's definitely a big sign of what the city of Babylon is. But the nation of Babylon is definitely America. And the nation of Babylon is going to get invaded inside and outside on all sides, it says, all sides, inside and outside, all the way around, by foreign enemies, massive foreign enemies. Armies, they're armies, enemies' armies. They're going to come in on all sides and from inside. So, from the CCP properties that the Chinese built up on for 20 plus years now. So, there might be some nukes interspersed with that. I mean, I've had dreams of some cities being nuked, I mean, pretty intense dreams too, left an impression on me. I mean, it scared me when I woke up. I mean, it was some cities that got nuked. It wasn't everywhere. Like, we didn't get blanketed by nukes. I've had dreams where I was fighting foreign troops on our soil, Chinese troops. But I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, I've been telling people the same things. People are going to believe what they want to believe, whatever that is. But I've been telling folks, if you get into your word, it tells you everything that's going to happen. In 1 hour, Babylon, of course, that describes a nuke, and that's talking about the city of Babylon. So yeah, some of our cities, they'll get nuked, but most of the nation is going to be invaded by armies, most of it. So the threat that most people will face will be a conventional threat. And besides just that, you're going to be dealing with a lot of weapons you never even imagined you'd ever see or deal with in a war. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of things coming at us. It's not just going to be, these regular conventional type armies. They're going to be conventional armies with also very, very high-tech ways of waging warfare. There's going to be a lot of nuances in what's coming. A lot of nuances. It's the doctrines, too, the fourth generation, also called hybrid warfare doctrines, where you combine the concept of the Trojan horse with the concept of the regular external forces crossing the borders and beach landing and parachuting in to act as a sort of like heavy-handed reinforcements for the Trojans that are already inside, beginning on CCP properties near their objectives. That's why this nation will fall within a matter of just several days. You know, it won't take them that long if they're beginning on properties that are fairly close to their objectives. It won't take them long to capture their objectives at all. I mean, who's really going to stop them? Who's going to stop them? No communications, no organization, no people in great numbers that are effectively trained to even or organized to even deal with it. I mean, they're not equipped to deal with it. I mean, how are you going to stop them? You're not. You're not. You can't. You can't stop a doctrine like that. The only thing you can do is defend yourself, and you can also try to evade your enemies and stay out of the way and defend yourself. And maybe then you can wait for them to get comfortable enough when the occupation sets in after the initial invasion phase is over with, when they come out of that like full force attack mode and they sort of settle into an occupation from an invasion, then you might have an opportunity to do something. But really, you're not being reactionary, and you're not going to take on the whole Chi-Com army by yourself with a shotgun at your mailbox. It don't work like that. Beer Gut Bubba ain't going to like run out there and have a realistic chance, against armored vehicles and machine guns and anti-tank missiles and aircraft strafing and dropping munitions and all kinds of payloads landing. You're not going to have a chance. I mean, you're going to have to stay out of the way. You're going to have to defend yourself and try and stay low key in a situation where we're being invaded by foreign militaries. And it is going to happen. It is going to happen. We will see it in our lifetime. That's for damn sure, and a lot sooner rather than later in our lifetimes. But that notwithstanding, be that as it may, be that as it were, we still have some more shit to go through. We still have things we have to experience first. Still have to experience a collapse and a civil woe, an internal conflict. And it'll be a lot like what happened in Syria. It'll be a multi-faction internal conflict, multi-way, multi-factional, sectarian, whatever you want to call it, right after we collapse. And that's why I'm saying this fiasco in Eastern Europe, it'll probably coincide around when we collapse, or it'll lead right into it. It'll be a major cause. It'll be one of the major causes of why we collapse. And I'm talking about the West. Because the blow to the psyche of the West, to the economies after the sanctions backfired and everything else failed, the whole just reciprocal end of things is going to be so bad for the West. It's probably going to lead right on into the collapse if it doesn't coincide with it at the same time. Just there's going to be so many blows coming from so many directions. It's going to be awful. It's going to be awful. But, I'm as ready as I can be for it. I hope everybody else is too. Turns out I'm, single again. I'm single again. Sometimes when you really care about somebody or you love somebody, it just doesn't work out. For whatever reason. And, I hold no ill will. I mean, it is what it is. It happened how it happens, I mean, I wish them well, and, they wish me well. I'll always be their friend, but, everybody at some point is going to find themselves alone, It's just going to be you and God, basically. Everybody will be in a position like that at some point or another. So everybody just has to get themselves as ready as they can be. Not just on the physical level, but psychologically, mentally, the psychological part, and, of course, spiritually too. Especially the spiritual part. But everybody's relationship with the Most High, with Holy Spirit, with Yeshua Messiah, everybody's relationship should be a personal one, and everybody has to figure all that out on their own. So ultimately, It's just going to be us, and it's just going to be God. But I thank each and everybody for coming who came, and I'm talking a long time now. Thanks to everybody who showed up. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Sylvia, and everybody, and Tommy, and everybody who came. Boris. Hey, Jennifer. I didn't see you in there. I just saw you there just a second ago. Thank you. You all have a wonderful day.